Associate Director of the MD-PhD program, and I'm going to give you an overview of the return process for MSTP students who are anticipating returning to the clinical years of training after finishing their PhD. So this is a very exciting time for both students and mentors in anticipating the resolution of their PhD and going back to their clinical training. As you're all probably familiar, the program is broken up into preclinical and clinical years with the PhD in the middle. And for the vast majority of our MSTP students, after completing the years 3, 4, or 5 of their PhD, will return to MD3, which is the 7th and then 8th year of training at the completion of the program. It's very natural for students who enter clerkships in the 3rd year to feel like a fish out of water. They've forgotten a lot of material, and it's sometimes unnerving to be placed into an environment where you're being expected to recall clinical information, where you haven't had exposure to that in a long time. And so the clerkships can often be a source of anxiety for students returning. But rest assured, we have a program that helps allay anxieties and bring students up to speed through being in touch with everyone over the course of the upcoming year or 2 years, and then a course at the end of it, which you are likely familiar, called the Clinical Refresher course. So I'm going to go through a demystified overview of the MSTP reentry process, and this is hopefully a guideline for you in anticipating whether or not you can go back. So step 1 is to decide whether to return. So students and mentors should talk together and come up with a reasonable plan for defense with a timeline that allows the student to defend in the winter of the year, the summer prior to their reentry. So students should plan to reenter in July, and it's recommended to defend around March, because the earlier in the winter you defend, the more chance you will have to be able to get back up to speed in the clinical refresher course and in finishing up PhD work in anticipation of the July return. It's possible to defend after that, but the students who've defended earlier have recommended to future students that this was a better way to go if it is at all possible to plan. So talk about that between now and December, and be anticipating of the need for committee meetings to have everyone on board with the plan. Step 2, if you do think that you're going to go back, you enter the lottery. There will be a planning meeting in January with student affairs, and this information will be provided to you as to how to enter the lottery. And at that point, you will get a schedule for clerkships. Now, it's important that you don't need to know 100% if you plan to reenter. You can always drop out of the lottery later, but it's important that you enter the lottery if at all there is a chance of you going back, because it's much easier to pull out of the lottery than it is to enter later on. Step 3, take the clinical refresher course. You'll be able to register for that in March, and the course runs for 8 weeks between April to June, and it will be 1 half-day a week that is important to plan on your schedule. And as soon as we have the dates for that, we will update you, because those sessions are all mandatory for all students who are going back in the upcoming summer. I'll tell you more about the course in a moment. Step 4, in Focus 5. So we recommend that students start in July with their clerkships, but if it is possible that you're going to delay beyond that, there is flexibility for reentry up until September. But regardless, if you're planning on entry at any time during the summer, you'll need to participate in Focus 5, which is the week prior to clerkships beginning. So that is the last week in June. And during that time, you'll learn some key clinical skills, and it will be an opportunity to re-enter the class as the rising 3rd year class. And then finally, in July, or beyond if you are planning on extending that a bit, the reentry. So you're all ready, you put on your white coat, and you start seeing patients and participating in clerkships. So the transition from the bench to the bedside is a challenging one, and it's a totally different skill set that's required, and we recognize that, and for that reason we've implemented this clinical refresher course. So the overview is that the first day is a full day clinical basics orientation. We affectionately like to call this boot camp, and we go from 8 to 5, and we will have a crash course reorienting students in how to do a history physical exam, how to do an oral presentation, a written presentation, reviewing the parts of both the history, the physical exam, program, and so by the end of that day, you'll be exhausted and knowledgeable on how to go back and see patients, even if you haven't seen any patients for the duration of your PhD. Then in each subsequent week, you'll be going out to see patients and having oversight of patient care presentations, both oral presentations and written presentations. So students will be paired up to see patients, and then we'll come back and present an oral history and physical presentation, and then we'll write up that case and we'll be given feedback directly on it. We do a lot of feedback both on oral and written presentation skills, and then at each day of the course there will be didactic sessions based on a pathophysiology case section. We have one on renal, we have one on hematology, we have one on pulmonology, infectious disease, cardiology, etc. And these are given by course directors from the preclinical courses or faculty with expertise in the area that do an interactive problem-solving session. And these are also coupled to some standardized test questions practice in advance to give you a little bit of a flavor for the kinds of questions that will be expected of you once you enter the clerkships. There's also an inpatient shadowing module one of the days where students will be paired up with inpatient teams in the hospital and will be able to be a fly on the wall and learn what it's like to be in the hospital. The feedback that we've gotten from the course is very positive. Students feel that it is very important in helping reorient them to clinical medicine and giving them a sense of what to anticipate along the way. Every year we've made changes in accordance with student feedback to make the course better and more efficient, and we recognize that this time is key for both defense and submitting manuscripts and wrapping up work in the lab, and so we're very mindful of protecting your time in a way that is appropriate and meaningful. Now, in terms of the third year, there are 4 modules. There's a D block, so-called, which is neurology, psychiatry, and elective. There's pediatrics, OBGYN, and elective. And then there's medicine, ambulatory care, geriatrics, and finally elective and surgery anesthesia. And as you can see, there are elective blocks embedded into each of these, with the exception of medicine, ambulatory care, geri, and then in-focus blocks flanking each of these. And the lottery will allow you to select the order and the locations of these clerkships. I will tell you that the results of the lottery are not as important as they seem. People get very anxious about their lottery choices, but in the end, students will tell you that it doesn't really matter what you start with. The general teaching is to not start with something that you think that you want to go into, but even people who start with that probably do okay because everything is graded on a curve, and for the first block, it's new for everyone. Electives are important, so there are a total of 28 weeks of elective time during the clinical years in years 3 and 4. You are allowed to take up to 16 weeks of that for research. That's how you're able to delay your entry to third year, by taking up to 3 months of elective at that time, but you can also use the elective time embedded within the different clerkships. Now, in terms of thinking through the rest of the year, I'm outlining 6 things that I hope that you'll keep in mind. The first is the committee meeting. It's very important to have a committee meeting, schedule it well in advance to allow for time for all the committee members to come together and to be able to outline your plan to finish at your desired timeline. Getting everyone on board on the same page is critical, and it can't happen soon enough. The earlier you give notice to be able to map out your plans, the more possible it will be to follow through with those expectations. Alongside with that is finishing experiments, so you will have developed a roadmap with your committee as far as what projects and pieces of the projects will need to come together, so you'll have this opportunity to finish your experiments during that time. Writing manuscripts goes hand in hand with the finishing of the experiments, and the next piece, which is the thesis defense. The thesis defense will require the committee coming together, identifying and inviting the external examiner, writing, giving plenty of time to your committee to read in advance, and then scheduling the defense. Graduation, which is wonderful and should be celebrated, and vacation. So please do schedule vacation, very important. Just please don't schedule it during the clinical refresher time. So the middle of June is the time to schedule a vacation. We will finish the clinical refresher by either the end of May or the first week in June, and so you'll have 2 weeks in the middle of June to take vacation. I recommend that, and then you'll need to be back by the beginning of In Focus 5. And so That's basically the timeline in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer specific questions if you have them, and the goal of this is to give you the lay of the land in advance so that you can plan all of these exciting things. But overall, it's a very exciting time, and I wish you congratulations and happy to be of help with any specific questions.